infamy lingers 50 miles east of Atlanta, where this lonely country road leads to the Moores Ford Bridge. Loy Harrison was a local farmer and Klansman. In July 1946, he drove both couples toward his farm, across the bridge.
Harrison takes the long way home that day, and as they neared Moores Ford Bridge, the car is blocked by a mob of 20 armed white men who drag them from the car, tie them up, and shoot each of them more than 100 times.
The Klan had blocked the road, so they saw these Klansmen. These Klansmen were unmasked. They were showing their faces. They weren't hiding.
This brutal crime would become known as the Moores Ford Bridge lynching and documented as the last mass lynching in American history. What happened that day was the result of fear, power, and the rigid social order of the Jim Crow South, where lynchings function as a tool of racial control, especially when white supremacy felt threatened. Today, we shine light on the unsolved case of the Moores Ford Bridge lynching of 1946. In the summer of 1946, tensions were dangerously high across Georgia. Georgia's Governor Eugene Talmadge was campaigning for a fourth term on a platform of unapologetic white supremacy. Historians often describe the political climate of that year as a powder keg, volatile, hostile, and ready to ignite. At the same time, Black veterans were returning home after serving in World War II. They came back expecting dignity, respect, and the freedoms they had fought for overseas. Instead, they were met with intimidation, resentment, and violence. In fact, the number of lynchings of Black people rose after the war, especially in the South. The country they had risked their lives for was not prepared to see them as equals. As reported by the Equal Justice Initiative, Georgia has the second highest number of documented lynchings in the United States, with Mississippi ranking first. George Washington Dorsey was born November 27, 1918. He was 27 years old. George had recently returned from World War II, where he served overseas for nearly 5 years. He had been back home for about 9 months. After surviving combat abroad, he came home determined to rebuild a quiet life in Georgia. Neighbors described him as quiet, hardworking, and reserved. Yet to some white locals, George was labeled as uppity, not because he caused trouble, but because he refused to bow down, perform, and accept the racial submission expected of Black men in the Jim Crow South. Born on September 20, 1922, Willa Mae Murray Dorsey, known as Mae to those closest to her, was just 23 years old. She was the wife of George Dorsey. Family members remembered Mae as the devoted wife who was deeply rooted in the church community. She was known for her warmth, her poise, and always taking pride in her appearance, often described as a woman with grace and an impeccable sense of style. Roger Malcolm, born March 22, 1922, was 24 years old. Roger was known among friends as protective and high-spirited. He had a young son from a previous marriage. According to federal investigative reports, Roger had a reputation for standing his ground, and this was something that white authorities often characterized as being surly or troublesome. In the Jim Crow South, even basic self-respect could be seen as defiance. Dorothy Dorsey Malcolm, known to family as Dot, was born July 25, 1926. She had just turned 20 years old. Dorothy was Roger's current wife and George's younger sister. She was 7 months pregnant. Relatives remembered Dorothy as outspoken with a free-spirited personality. George and Mae Dorsey lived and worked quietly as field and domestic workers on land owned by J. Lloyd Harrison in Oconee County. just outside of Monroe, Georgia. J. Lloyd Harrison was said to be affiliated with the KKKs and was described by some as a brutal employer who operated a structure that many historians have compared to slave-like economic dependency. Roger and Dorothy Malcolm lived in Walton County, also working as field hands or sharecroppers, on land owned by B.H. Hester in an area locally known as Hestertown. Like many sharecroppers across the South, they lived under harsh and unequal conditions. In interviews later conducted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, many white neighbors described the couples as industrious and peaceful. They were not seen as violent or dangerous, but one incident would set in motion one of the most horrific acts of racial violence in modern American history. On Sunday, July 14, 1946, at approximately 6 p.m., an altercation erupted at 2969 Hestertown Road. Roger Malcolm became involved in a heated confrontation outside the home of Barnett Hester, a white man he had known since childhood. Barnett was the son of Roger's employer, farm owner B.H. Hester, and the brother of a prominent local official, George Hester. Accounts of what happened that day differ. Some reports say Roger and his wife Dorothy were arguing, and Barnett approached Roger, ordering him to leave the property. Other accounts claim Roger went directly to Barnett's home to confront him. Either way, the conflict centered around accusations that Barnett and Dorothy were involved in an affair. Some local rumors even suggested that Dorothy might have been pregnant by Barnett, though this was never confirmed. What is certain is that the confrontation turned physical and ended with Roger stabbing Barnett in the chest with a knife. Although Barnett survived, his injuries were described as serious. He would remain hospitalized for weeks. Roger was arrested and held in the county jail in Monroe, Georgia, a small rural town about 50 miles east of Atlanta, Georgia. For many white residents, this was not viewed as simply an assault. A black man injuring a white man was seen as a direct challenge to white supremacy, a violation they believed demanded fatal retaliation. On Thursday, July 25, 1946, 11 days after his arrest, Roger Malcolm was released on bond. The man who secured his release was J. Lloyd Harrison, employer and landlord to the Dorseys. Initially, Harrison refused to help, reportedly fearing backlash from the white community. But days later, in a decision that surprised many, he agreed to post Roger's bail. Harrison claimed he needed Roger's labor for a new sawmill operation he was starting, and also agreed to allow Roger and Dorothy to move onto his property. That same day was also the 20th birthday of Dorothy Malcolm. She saw Roger's release and the promise of a new start as a gift. Harrison invited Dorothy, George Dorsey, and May Dorsey to ride with him into town to pick up Roger from jail. When they arrived at the Monroe County Jail, Harrison went inside alone to speak privately with Deputy Sheriff W.B. Gaither. Within minutes, at approximately 4:30 p.m., he paid the $600 bond that secured Roger's release. In the Jim Crow South, claims of needing labor often provided white landowners both legal and social cover for bailing out black workers, reinforcing a system that allowed employers to exert near total control over their lives and movements. On the drive home, Harrison took an unusual route. The road leading to Moores Ford Bridge was not on the direct route from the jail to his property. It was a detour. He drove past his own farm, continuing towards a more isolated area. He then turned off the main highway onto a winding dirt road. Around 5:30 p.m., roughly an hour after leaving the jail, the vehicle approached Moores Ford Bridge, which spans the Appalachian River between Walton County and Oconee County. A few yards before reaching the bridge, their path was blocked. A mob of roughly 20 to 30 armed white men stood in the road. The men were unmasked. With guns in their hands, they approached the vehicle and peered inside. Quote, A big man dressed mighty proud in a double-breasted brown suit was given the orders. He pointed to Roger Malcolm and said, "We want that nigger." Then he pointed to George Dorsey and said, "We want you too, Charlie," end quote. A statement J. Lloyd Harrison would later tell investigators. George had a brother named Charlie Boy, so investigators later believed this may have been a misstatement or confusion in the chaos. When the two men refused to get out the car, calling Roger and George by name, members of the mob dragged them out, kicking, struggling, and shouting. George cried out to the mob to let the women go. As he and Roger were forced into the dirt, their hands roughly tied behind their backs. According to the files from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, it is believed the women may initially have been spared, but Dorothy Malcolm recognized a few of the unmasked attackers. She reportedly opened the car door and yelled out their names, and May Dorsey began screaming and cursing at the men surrounding them. Later, witnesses' accounts say this is what led the man in the brown suit to order both women out the vehicle. Dorothy pleaded desperately, begging them not to harm her unborn child. All four victims were dragged to a nearby area along the riverbank near Mooresford Bridge and tied to an oak tree. Investigators later determined that sometime between 5:30 p.m. and 6 o'clock p.m., the mob opened fire, using rifles, shotguns, and pistols, unleashing more than 100 bullets at close range. Accounts documented by the FBI and described in the book Fire in a Crane Break reveals the full scale of brutality. Family members later struggled to identify some of the victims due to the extent of the gunfire. Investigators determined the attack involved was not only shooting, but additional acts of mutilation that reflected extreme racial hatred. Roger Malcolm's first wife reportedly could only identify him by his lips. His body showed signs of partial castration, and a 10-foot-long rope was found around his neck. George Washington Dorsey's right eye had been destroyed by gunfire, and his right ear was left barely attached. May Dorsey's face remained largely intact, but like the others, her body was riddled with bullets. The right side of Dorothy Malcolm's jaw was blown away, along with several of her teeth. Dorothy was 7 months pregnant, and beyond the gunfire, investigators documented that the mob had removed her unborn child. The fetus was later found discarded between the bodies of Dorothy and May. It was reported that when the victims were found, Dorothy and May's bodies lay collapsed in the dirt, and they were no longer bound, while Roger and George remained tied to the tree connected, with their hands still bound by rope. Although Roger Malcolm had been the immediate focus of the mob's anger, George Dorsey was not a random bystander. He was called out by name and targeted alongside Roger. Rumors circulated in the community that George, since returning home from military service, had violated racial boundaries, including allegations of relationships with white women. In the Jim Crow South, even unproven accusations of interracial contact could often be used as justification for legal violence. May Dorsey and Dorothy Malcolm were essentially unalive for being present and for recognizing members of the unmasked mob. This horrific crime seized the national headlines and shocked the world. Graphic details of what happened spread rapidly through newspapers across the United States and abroad. Civil rights organizations demanded accountability. Editorials condemned the violence. This brutal crime was a symbol of the ongoing terror Black Americans faced in the Jim Crow South. In response, President Harry S. Truman ordered federal attention to the case amid the national growing concern over racial violence. Agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigations were dispatched to Georgia, launching what became one of the largest civil rights investigations of its time. The case marked a turning point, helping push racial violence into the center of federal political debate. That same year, Truman established the President's Committee of Civil Rights, and in 1947, the committee released a landmark report known as To Secure the Rights Report that exposed the gap between American ideas and the reality of segregation, violence, and systemic discrimination. making Truman the first sitting president to make anti-lynching part of a formal executive order. When questioned by investigators, J. Lloyd Harrison claimed he had been ambushed and held at gunpoint along with the others, but escaped unharmed. He insisted he did not recognize any members of the mob, even though the attackers were unmasked. Many suspected Harrison had prior knowledge of what happened, or that he had helped organize the trap, but he was never charged. Many people in the community knew or believed they knew who had participated, but no one spoke openly. Investigators encountered what became known as the Wall of Silence. Even with federal involvement, the investigation stalled, and the case eventually went cold.
Georgia's governor at the time said 15 to 20 of the mob members are known by name, but a grand jury indicted no one.
Decades later, renewed public attention, along with involvement from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, brought the case back into focus. The investigation was reopened in 1991, again in 2000, and once more in 2006, but one critical barrier never changed. The original 1946 federal investigation was sealed. It remained sealed through every investigation that followed, and remains sealed to this day.
They sealed the grand jury files.
Why is that?
They were elected officials, they were law enforcement, they were developers, they were major farmers, and everybody knew their names.
Critics believe those names are hiding inside sealed grand jury transcripts. The Department of Justice opposes opening them, arguing grand jury proceedings should remain secret.
According to the files from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, some investigators speculated that George Hester, the brother of Barnett Hester, may have been involved, and may have been the man in the brown suit giving orders. In rural Georgia during the early to mid-1900s, such formal clothing signaled wealth, influence, or authority, a detail that fueled those speculations, but the identity was never confirmed. It was reported that more than 2,700 people were interviewed over the course of the investigations. Over the years, some witnesses did come forward, but investigators found their statements incomplete or inconsistent, citing an inability to build a viable case. No one was ever arrested or charged. The case was officially closed in January of 2018, after both federal and state investigators concluded that all known suspects had passed away and no further leads remained. The Moores Ford Bridge lynching remains unsolved. The massacre became a defining historical marker of the Jim Crow era. It exposed the deep failures of local and federal systems to protect racial terror and helped galvanize the emerging civil rights movement. Lynchings did not stop after 1946, but large-scale mob lynchings became less common. After the Moores Ford Bridge lynching, to avoid the national attention, many white supremacists increasingly targeted individuals rather than large groups. For generations, lynchings have been treated primarily as local crimes, leaving prosecutions vulnerable for racial bias and intimidation. It wasn't until March of 2022 when President Joe Biden signed the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act into law, formally designating lynchings as a federal hate crime. The legislation granted the federal government clear authority to intervene when states failed to prosecute racially motivated mob violence. It marked the culmination of centuries of failed anti-lynching efforts, a long struggle shaped in part by national outrage over atrocities like Moores Ford Bridge lynchings and the countless lynchings that came before it. The Moores Ford Bridge lynching is widely documented as the last lynching in American history. The Malcolm and Dorsey families have not been forgotten. In 1998, a community memorial service was held to honor the victims. The following year, in 1999, a state historical marker was placed at the site of the attack near Moores Ford Bridge, becoming the first official recognition of a lynching by the Georgia Historical Society. Since 2005, annual reenactments have been held to preserve the memory of what happened. The Moores Ford Bridge lynching is not just a story of the past. It's a moment in history when an entire system, social, legal, and political, failed to protect human life. Violence was shielded, silence became loyalty, and justice depended on who held the power. And the sad thing is that even today, this still rings true. 5 lives were taken by unmasked men who never tried to hide, and yet the case still remains unsolved.
I want them exposed. I want the truth to be known.
Without the truth, there's no healing.
It's very difficult. There's always room for forgiveness. There's room for reconciliation and healing. Help us get there.
73 years later, the only justice possible may be the truth.
May George Washington Dorsey, Willa Mae Dorsey, Roger Malcolm, Dorothy Malcolm, and Baby Malcolm rest in peace. No story should be forgotten, no voice should go unheard. Sending my deepest condolences and prayers to the family and friends. Until the next time, I'm Lock Jewel, and thank you for watching Shades of Crime. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and remember to pray. God's listening.